Sir, please stay with us now. We have been joined by Quatrina Hosain, a political analyst. Now, thank you very much, Quatrina, for being with us on Indus News. Now, we were talking about how the United States was fighting in Afghanistan for 20 years, and I'm sure you must be aware of the developing situation right now. The negotiations are ongoing. But just to have your comment on the latest statement by Lieutenant General retired Naeem Khalid Lodhi that the United States was not properly defeated. Maybe they did win in some aspects.
At this point, I think, with all respect to General Saab, it is what America gained or lost at this point is not really the focus right now. I think the focus is really on what the Afghan people are facing. My personal reaction is that, yes, America failed in every respect. They may have, as General Saab said, made some gains in terms of geopolitics. But in every other way, their mission in 20 years was not clear. George Bush started out by saying that they were there to rebuild Afghanistan. They have ended up destroying it and made it even worse than it was 20 years ago or even 40 years ago. Afghanistan has a long history, and it has been, in many ways, the battleground for multiple states all the time. And everybody has just walked away from it.
Right. Also, Quatrina, for your comment now, that we know negotiations are ongoing right now between the Taliban and the Kabul administration. Let's just think about what if the negotiations do not go as planned. What's next?
Well, number one, as from the last report that I read, which was about 20 minutes ago, the Taliban spokesperson or their people are still maintaining that the Taliban will not enter Kabul itself. Now, videos coming out on social media indicate that the Taliban are very much inside Kabul already. I think one of the things that we need to look at is if there is a saving grace in all of this. While I think historians will write lots of books about the complete collapse of the Afghan National Army and the security forces, I think that one saving grace in all of this is that the huge rout of the Afghan forces and the surrenders have possibly reduced civilian casualties. In fact, I would say they've definitively reduced civilian casualties. And right now, we know that thousands of people fled to Kabul in the past week, trying to get shelter, trying to get away from the warring forces. And at this point, if Kabul, in effect, goes for a power-sharing agreement, then that would save a lot of lives. What if the power agreement, there has to be something. There will not be, I cannot imagine a scenario where the government, Ghani's government at this point would think that there is even a chance of them holding out. There isn't. It's all over. Now it is just going to be to negotiate the safe exits for people, I would assume. And a power-sharing agreement, I would assume, would be with Mr. Abdullah.
Right. Now, Mr. Lodhi, I'd love to have your comment on this thing. Now, do you think the Taliban are going to be ready for a power-sharing agreement? Any sort of
Definitely. They have said so, and they have said so many times. And they also understand that international recognition and internal support is very closely linked with that. So Taliban this time are a different Taliban. Looking at their behavior, looking at the way they have done all the things so far. So I'm quite confident that there will be an inclusive government. It will be a peaceful transition. And their behavior towards women, towards children, towards education, towards everything is likely to be very different. This is what we expect. And that is how they can get international recognition, and that is how they can bring prosperity to Pakistan and the region.
And right, also, the Taliban must be quite handy, and they must be quite open to handling misinformation, which is going to be spread about the Taliban right now. As I can see a tweet by Suhail Shaheen, the spokesperson of Taliban right now in front of me, that all those claims that the Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan forces people to marry their young girls to Mujahideen are totally wrong. And it is a poisonous propaganda. And I'm sure we all understand and we recognize who is making all this misinformation arise precise. I'd love to have Mr. Lodhi, your comment, and then we'll have Quatrina's comment on this.
I think that is true, because the problem is that for the time being, the entire media was covering Kabul regime and the Kabul from inside, and very little was being covered whatever is actually happening elsewhere in the entire country. So now, once they are in the coalition government, they will have access to the world media, and then the real thing will come up quite clearly. The world had apprehensions because of their last stint of tenure, and rightly so, they were having these apprehensions, but those have to be removed, and Taliban will have to prove through their actions that they will not repeat all that which was so abhorrent for the world at large.
Right, Quatrina, just to add on this question, obviously you're going to comment on this thing. Now, just to add on this, the Taliban have been created as an entity which obviously the international community or the world, people living inside on earth do not really admire. And obviously the Taliban have proved militarily and politically as they have taken control of Afghanistan. But I believe now they have to fight the 5th generation hybrid war as well.
I'm not sure that I'm willing to give the Taliban as much credit for a unified policy as General Lodhi is optimistically hoping for. I haven't seen that yet. From the reports that we have seen in the media from places like Herat and other places, for example, in one city, women who were working in a bank were told that they do not need to return and that men in their family could place them. We have other reports of schools, for example, being told that they will no longer allow girls for schooling. They can only receive religious instruction. We don't know what's going to happen in Mazar-e-Sharif, but it's lost a huge Hazara population. I think that it is too early for us to assume that the Taliban have changed in dramatic ways over the past 20 years. I'm sure there has been some change. It would be impossible for them not to have understood that there will be consequences for their actions at this point. I think this coming week and 10 days, what we are seeing is that we're getting different stories from the ground, and we're getting different statements from Mr. Shaheen. Until we see some kind of unified policy coming in terms of how they're going to address the issue of women's rights and children, it is going to be extremely disturbing for everybody.
Right, but the Taliban have already been quite vocal on this, Quatrina, that the women are going to be allowed schooling, and also they will be allowed to work in Afghanistan under the Taliban regime, but under proper attire.
I think that, again, I will reinforce the point that in the past 20 years, we have not seen Afghan women turning into completely westernized concepts. I resent the focus constantly on attire. Every Afghan woman whom I have seen in recent years has always had her head covered. They have always been a very decently and professionally and respectfully attired. I don't think that anyone could, even in their wildest imagination, say that women in Kabul or any other city in Afghanistan were dressing like they were, let's say, 50 years ago. I think focus on attire is the wrong comment. Again, I will reinforce, I have yet to see that there is a unity of policy and command in the Taliban. It's early days yet. What we are hearing from their spokesperson is different from what the commanders may be doing on the ground. The reports that are coming out are very, very contradictory.
Right now, I'll just have to add Mr. Lodhi into this discussion. Obviously, we cannot rule out the spokesperson's statements contradicting the commander's commandants, can we, sir?
But I think I would agree with Madam Quatrina this far, that we'll have to wait for to see the actions rather than the words. So we can wait for that. But one thing I would like to raise, that how much concern do we have how ladies wear or they do not wear in Saudi Arabia? How much concern do we have what they are doing in Iran? So why this special concern about Afghanistan? Yes, of course, they are our neighboring country, all right. We should be worried about our own country, and that is it. Afghanistan will be a different country. If the majority of their people, they want a certain way of life, we should have no objection to that. So I see these apprehensions misplaced, that what they will be doing and what they will not, as long as they have overwhelming support of the people. Yes, if they are atrocious in their attitude, if they are forcing people against their will, doing something, then I totally go with the madam.
Right, so now obviously there are negotiations happening, and we can expect a peaceful transition of power to the Taliban. And the Taliban have already been very vocal about this, that they want to implement Islamic Sharia law in Afghanistan and live in Afghanistan and carry out the government activities according to the rules of Islam. How do you think that is going to posture?
You know, what has this to do with us? I mean, if Afghan people want any sort of system, whether it is Sharia or it is non-Sharia, why should we get worried unnecessarily? I ask the same question. Are we ever worried that what sort of political system is there in China? Have we ever asked that what sort of political system is there in Saudi Arabia? They are our very close friends. So this will be another country. So let them do whatever they want to do. Yes, one thing is, I know that our elite is concerned about it, and rightly so. And I keep on saying that, and let me say that again. If Afghan Taliban, with the overwhelming support of the people of Afghanistan, they succeed in bringing justice, social justice and economic justice, and they succeed in giving their people the protection, then there will be a spillover, then there's a likely spillover in Pakistan, and that spillover will not come from Afghanistan. It will erupt from Pakistan itself, because our democracy is not delivering. If our democracy starts delivering as far as justice is concerned, as far as education is concerned, as far as protection and rights of the people are concerned, then we need not bother. Why our elite is bothered is because of this factor which I've just mentioned.
Right, Quatrina, just to add on this, why is the world worried about the form of government in Afghanistan after Taliban comes in power?
Well, I don't know what the world is thinking, but I can point out that I saw a video on mainstream media of two men who were summarily hanged for kidnapping, if I'm not mistaken. Now, while we talked about justice, and there is a great debate going on in Pakistan right now over the Noor Muqaddam case, a lot of people demanding that the perpetrator or the accused killer be hanged immediately. And we are constantly reinforcing, I think, that there is a need for rule of law, that there is a process of a trial, that there is a process of making sure that justice is done and seen to be done, but not in this manner where somebody is accused and then hanged, which is what we saw the Taliban do, and this has been their track record in the past. There is absolutely no room for miscarriages of justice when summary justice is meted out in this manner. These are the straws in the wind that I am scared of. And another point that I don't know if it's been discussed yet today or not, but for the past few years, the Taliban, the global drug trade has been controlled. Almost 80% of the global drug trade comes from Afghanistan, and that has been very much been from areas which are Taliban controlled. Now, 20 years ago, or rather I should say 25 years ago, back in 1996-97, the Taliban were not involved heavily in the drug trade at that time, and there were reports that they were actively against it. Well, that seems to have changed, and now 80% of the global drug trade is originating from Afghanistan, and the blowback is in Pakistan already. Drugs and crystal meth and all these things have made out their way into our cities. Last time we had the Kalashnikov culture as our heritage. This time our fear is going to be the drugs. And then furthermore, another great fear I have right now is that this will embolden our own extremist organizations. Pakistan has fought a tremendously hard struggle against extremist elements, whether it was in Swat or whether it was in the tribal areas. But those elements haven't gone away. Will they be emboldened by what is happening in Afghanistan to start? I don't want to see a return of the kind of terrorism that we saw in Pakistan in the past few years. We've only had peace for a few years.
Right, Quatrina, just to add on this, just shed some light on this about on your analysis. How do you want the things to move on in Afghanistan?
I feel uncomfortable with saying how I want to see things move in Afghanistan. I think
just as an analysis,
I think the ideal situation for Afghanistan would be some kind of power-sharing government at this time to minimize bloodshed, to minimize an outright civil war in which civilians would get completely devastated, ground into dust, literally. The Afghan people have suffered too much, and it is time that that stops. Whether the question is that will they be allowed to choose their own government? Will there be elections held? Will there be a lawyer jirga? Will there be any way for the Afghan people to choose what kind of government they want to live under, rather than one being imposed on them by military force? And that is what the Taliban is doing right now. They're imposing their will by force. And while I have no soft corner in the least for Mr. Ashraf Ghani, for President Ashraf Ghani, I think that he has played a huge role in bringing Afghanistan down. I think that the Afghan people have been ignored constantly. They haven't exercised the elections that they had were a joke. And I think that they don't get to have a voice, and that's what concerns me. That's what worries me. We have seen too many times grand conferences and meetings and so forth, but the Afghan people have not been represented.
No, sir, do you, Mr. Lodhi, do you agree to this statement that the Afghans have no voice?
So far, I think that is true, because we haven't heard that voice. Not that they don't have voice. We do not have the wherewithal to hear that voice, because we are only listening to the voices from Kabul, because the arrangements were such that we could only listen to Kabul. But now probably we'll be able to listen. I think I agree with Quatrina Sahiba that we would like to see an inclusive government. We would like to see a government which is recognized by the international community. We would like to see a government which has internal support, overwhelming internal support. And that is what the world is looking. We would like to have peace. We would like to have, a lot of economic activity. This is what we all are waiting and wishing for. And I think this all will happen. I will also try to alleviate certain apprehensions which Madam have forwarded. Number one, Pakistan army is not Afghan army. That the extremists over here will do the same as whatever is happening, according to her. Because I do not agree with her once she says that Afghan Taliban are forcing their way. No, my dear sister. It is a political coup. With the military forces, you cannot, occupy such vast areas within 3 weeks. It is impossible, militarily illogical. So it is a political takeover, and with the help of the people of Afghanistan, it is happening. And every second day, heads are chopped off in Saudi Arabia. Every week, there are 3 to 4 people shot for corruption in China. We do not bother about that. We seem to be too much bothered what happened in Afghanistan.
Let's keep our bothering for. Yes, if you want to, Quatrina, yes, you can.
I absolutely agree with General Saab that the Pakistan Army is a very professional, well-equipped army. There is no doubt about that. I mean, that would be completely illogical if I were to even begin to compare the Afghan National Forces with the Pakistan Army. That's just apples and oranges. But what I don't want to see is to put our security forces, whether it's the army or the police, our frontline defenders, through the same kind of trial by fire that we have suffered. Pakistan suffered a lot after 9/11. We have had tens of thousands, by conservative estimates, 80,000 Pakistanis and law enforcement and military people and civilians have been killed in horrible ways. I just don't want to see that kind of terrorism in Pakistan again. I don't think anybody does. And that is my fear, legitimate or not legitimate. But I am scared of, number one, extremism raising its head again in Pakistan, and number two, the drugs. I think that we cannot minimize the impact that drugs would have, because obviously when it flows out through the borders, it flows into Pakistan as well. And I think that that is something that we should be considering very strongly. The other thing that we have to think about right now is that we are hoping that the refugee crisis won't erupt like it did post-1979, but it possibly will, and Pakistan would
Can
be
I say a sentence about drugs?
hard.
Yes, sir, please.
Just a sentence. One, that if refugees have not come hence so far, there will be no refugees in future, I can assure you that. The second thing is that in the last tenure, the drug trade had gone down to zero during the last Taliban tenure. It again took up, came up under the tutelage of United States forces and the Afghan government. So again, it will go down if history is any indicator.
Right, so we're talking about drugs, and I'm sure that is a major aspect that the world is facing at large. Let's talk about Pakistan's response. Obviously, we have a statement coming out from the Foreign Ministry of Pakistan, which has given a statement saying it will continue to support the efforts for a political settlement in Afghanistan. Now, Quatrina, what role Pakistan can play amid the ongoing developments?
That is a tough one. I think that there has been a lot of hostility towards Pakistan, which I resent. I think that Pakistan has been used whenever the Western powers choose to use us or want to use us, and then it's a kind of shoot the messenger scenario, isn't it? So yes, there is residual hostility within me about the attitudes that prevail in the West about Pakistan's role in the past 20, 30 years. What role can Pakistan play now? Absolutely insist and support a political settlement, a power-sharing agreement, if that is what it takes. So at this point, I don't know what shape or form that government will take. I think it is important for us to follow the general perception. If the Taliban do not keep their commitments, which they have said that they will, then I think Pakistan should think very carefully before affording any kind of diplomatic recognition. I think we should wait on anything like that until there is a lawyer jirga, until there is a grand meeting of all the political leadership in Afghanistan, which in this very fluid situation is hard to see. The Taliban are on a high right now. They are running, ahead of the pack. I don't see why they should concede in the position that they have right now, why they would want to concede anything. And that's where I see the problems. If Ashraf Ghani does not see the writing on the wall, if he does not cooperate, and then I see this as becoming a very fractured situation. And we thought last night that he would resign. That didn't happen. Now it's going to be interesting to see what he does next. And I think that the next 48 hours are going to be crucial. There's one point that I want to maybe restate here, which is that the Western countries, predominantly the United States, Britain, Norway, Denmark, several others, are either closing their embassies or or evacuating their staff. And that process, they thought that they had time. They thought that Kabul would, according to total gross misassessment by the U.S. intelligence, they thought they had time for at least a few weeks, months they were talking about, to be able to have, quote-unquote, what they called an orderly exit. Well, that isn't happening. And I am wondering if the Taliban are just waiting for the Western powers to exit without having any kind of fighting with American forces. As you know, the Americans airlifted in another 3,000 soldiers to help other people leave. They could all be in the middle of all this right now. So I think that there is a very strategic move by the Taliban to simply wait and not confront the 600-odd British soldiers who've gone in, the 3,000 American additional soldiers who've gone in. I don't think they want a confrontation with NATO and America and NATO allies. So I think they're going to wait that out. But the NATO and the United States cannot abdicate their responsibility at this point. They absolutely cannot. We talk about the Troika Plus, but I think at this point, it has to be a global initiative to make sure that the commitments that are made are fair and upheld.
Right now, Quatrina made a very important statement here, Mr. Lodhi. Can we expect a confrontation, or if the Kabul is the Taliban are going to rest and wait for them to leave?
First of all, I think I'm very happy and I must appreciate the way this debate is going on, and I must say thank you to Madam for being so cool and composed. The thing is, I would like to answer that question which you asked about Pakistan's policy, the statement which has just come out.
Yes.
I think that is just the correct statement. Pakistan's stance is very clear. We have no favorites, and we would like to have Afghan-led, Afghan-owned solution. And I think we are adhering to that. And we would contribute wherever it is required as far as peace is concerned. I think we must stick to that. We made one or two statements which are not required, unrequired statements, that if they come like that and if they come like this. So the only my apprehension is that whereas we should have no favorites in Afghanistan, which is very true, we should also not toe the line of any one of the blocks like American bloc or the Chinese bloc, because what I see, what I sense is that we are looking up to America, that what are they saying, what are they doing, we will do the same. Whereas, the Chinese are saying something else, Russians are saying something else, and they are more closer to us, they are more closer to the realities. So I think we must keep our eyes and ears open and look after our own interest, and do not necessarily, I know that within 1 week, we have to get a trance of 2 billion from IMF and such like things, and FATF is all those things. We all understand the strings which are being attached, and we are being forced to say things which may not be in our interest. So as far as whether there can be any problem within Kabul, if whatever has happened so far, if that is any indicator, I don't think that, for example, today Taliban were in a position to get into Kabul. Yes, they never wanted to take up a fight, and they want a peaceful transition. And that is why I think they are waiting on the gates, and they will do that because they have not shed much blood up to now. So why should I believe that they will do it, from here on? And then remember 2-3 things. One, that they have shown brilliant military strategy by absorbing the leftover spaces, which were not contested first. Then they went for all the crossing points in all the neighboring countries, and then they came for the cities. I think this was a brilliant move. And secondly, they were visiting Iran, they were visiting China, they were visiting Russia and everywhere, and they were assuring them that we will not support ETIM and we will not support Chechens, and we will not. And why should we be worried that they will be supporting Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan? They will not. They will not give. They said so many times they will not give space for any such activities. And then whatever I have seen so far between a superpower and Taliban, after the agreement which was signed between them, superpower did not adhere to that agreement. Taliban so far has not violated that agreement. So why should I not believe them, whatever they are saying? And then if they have shown brilliance in military strategy, in diplomacy, why should I not believe that they will also be brilliant as far as internal politics is concerned?
Right, so just to add on the superpower had spent about $89 billion budgeted for training the Afghan army, and that $89 billion worth of training to the Afghan army was just lambasted by the men from the mountains.
I've understood your point, and I'll just say 2 sentences. One, armies are not made by just putting on uniforms and handing over them the guns. They require morale, they require will to fight, and they require the backing of the people. All these things were absent as far as one army is concerned. So money didn't matter.
Right, Quatrina, the superpower trained the Afghans, spent a lot of money, 89 billion to be exact, and the Taliban just took them over in weeks.
In days almost. A depressing thought, isn't it? I concur with General Lodhi that armies are not made by money. They are made by commitment. They are made, and that is a worrying thought. It could play out in multiple different ways. I think we are going to be analyzing this for years. But one thing that we do want to is that $89 billion was not wholly spent on the Afghans. I think a lot of it was spent on security contractors who were mostly Americans or Westerners. I think a lot of money was spent on their own establishment that they had there. So I would take that I would cut that down a little bit. But I found it interesting. When President Joe Biden, I think about 4 or 5 days ago, said that they're still paying the salaries of the Afghan National Army. And on other respects, what we hear is that they were ghost soldiers, that they only existed on paper, that there were people who were pocketing the money that was assigned for this 300,000 strong Afghan National Army. So I think that the corruption on the ground in Afghanistan has played a huge part in all of this. By no means do I intend to imply that all members of the Afghan National Army were not loyal to their country. I think that would be very cruel of me to say that. What I would want to say is that they were equipped, but not to the extent that we assume. And the other element that we would have to keep very much in mind is that the precipitate departure of the United States, the vacating of the Bagram Air Base overnight without even telling their Afghan counterparts that they were leaving, I think that was a savage blow. It could have been handled much more professionally than the Americans have handled it. And I think that they're going to be questioning. A lot of that will be the subject for intense debate and analysis. One thing is very, very clear. We have to consider at this point what impact does the Taliban ideology and have on the Afghan people. Did the Afghan army simply they fought in some places. We know that they fought. We've received enough reports about the fighting that happened in Kunduz, for example, Mazar-e-Sharif as well. Sure. What we don't know is what commands they were getting from their military leadership. Changing the chief of army staff or their equivalent just 48 hours ago, it was insane. I don't see any command, any leadership coming from the Kabul government. And that is a huge factor contributing to the rout that we have seen of the Afghan forces.
Right, just to add on this now, Mr. Lodhi, Quatrina has talked about how the government of Afghanistan obviously was corrupt. Obviously, all of them are not black sheeps. But we have seen a lot of money coming into Afghanistan. And obviously, we still see mountains in Afghanistan and sand there. We do not see development. And obviously, that money was spent on training the Afghans, plus etc., etc., etc. But 20 years, we haven't seen any concrete development. And as Quatrina is saying, the ideology of the Afghan people is very important. And we have seen as the Taliban is taking over Afghanistan, as provinces are falling to the Taliban, they're not taking them over. So the Taliban does have public support on ground.
You're right. You know, this question of ideology is very important. Abhi, kya baat hai? Hello? Okay, thank you. Sorry for this interruption.
That's fine.
One of the problems with the training of Afghan army was that the trainers were not aware of the sociology and the ideology of the Afghan people. And in any army, any armed forces, this is a very important factor, that the armed forces must gel with the people of that country. And that can only happen if they also believe in the sociology, in the customs and traditions of the people of that country. Because the trainers were from outside, even Indians were there, and mostly US trainers were there. They have their own line of thinking. They have their own worldview. And that is why they were not able to create a properly harmonized army as far as Afghanistan is concerned. And one factor which I'm aware of, most of the foot soldiers of Afghan army, they were from the, Pashtun ethnic groups. And most of the officers, they were from other ethnic groups. Now, this also creates a lot of problem as far as Army's command and those who are led is concerned. I think there were many things which can be discussed, but probably this is not the time. We have other important things to discuss. But the main thing is, this army was not having the will to fight. This army was probably in their hearts and mind was not sold out to the idea of Ashraf Ghani and the Americans. They were probably showing more affinity towards what Afghan Taliban were saying and asking them to do. That is why they surrendered in hordes. They did not give up a proper fight except for 2-3 places, which Madam was saying that is true. All said and done, armies are not created just by money, and armies are not created just in even 20 years or 25 years. It requires a lot of time, a lot of investment, a lot of training, a lot of gelling with the society as a whole. So there are so many other factors. So this army was, you can say, detached from the society as a whole. They were detached as far as the ground situation is concerned. So they had to suffer.
Right, Mr. Lodhi. Now, let's talk on this after a very short break, and we'll keep you updated, this audience, with all the developing situation in Afghanistan after a short break.